A year ago, I tackled one of the most difficult Pokemon challenges I have ever encountered, catching a Ditto as fast as possible in the Generation 4 games. And while you might not expect this to be too tough, as you simply need to obtain the National Dex upgrade in order to gain Ditto access, and the Dex upgrade only requires us to encounter each Pokemon in the base game rather than catch, actually optimizing how quickly you can do this is complete and utter chaos, requiring meticulous routing, analysis, and preparation for this game's Pokemon encounters and story. But what you get out of it is an entirely fresh way to play through these classic games with a new challenge. So today, I'm bringing back the journey I went on in order to see just how fast this Pokedex achievement can be done in the Gen 4 games. Now, first things first, we need to determine which game to play. And while the base games are going to require us seeing 150 total Pokemon for this challenge, Platinum unsurprisingly only adds to this with 60 more entries to find. So while we can stick with the base games, we still need to decide between Diamond and Pearl. When it comes to speedrunning, Pearl would be the game of choice, since Palkia is the fastest endgame carry available. But then how far do we have to progress to complete our mission? Well, because there are no story progression checks for the National Dex at all, we will need to determine if there is a point at which we stop and focus solely on the Dex entries. Luckily though, there's an easy answer, as the Elite Four contains not only a handful of encounters that can't be battled prior to this point, but the champion Cynthia has 3 particular Pokemon we would need: Spiritomb, Garchomp, and Milotic, any of which would take far longer to encounter or evolve into than simply following the speedrun through the league. However, since we don't need to win a battle in order to get a Dex entry, the optimal amount of progression is reaching Cynthia's 3rd Pokemon we need to see, after which we lose the battle since it's faster than winning and watching the victory scene. With that knowledge, I reviewed every encounter across a Manipulus speedrun to find a total of 118 Dex entries along the way. And all of this also solves the version question, since we need Palkia to reach Cynthia fastest. And those 118 Mons cover every version exclusive aside from one irrelevant technicality, and the other box legend, which Cynthia's grandma would need to show you in either game. Thus, we can now move on to planning a route for the 32 Pokemon we are missing. Generally, this is broken into 2 questions. Where and when is it best to find each of these? For a few Pokemon, the answers are relatively simple. Unknown, for example, is only seen in the Salacian Ruins, and since the run passes through here just twice, we will need to choose one of those visits to do the encounter, with the faster choice being the first, since our Repel will already be down, due to catching a Beaverl right beforehand. The next easiest to cover would be the rest of the legends, as we just need to visit each lake and run from their respective trio member. Now for Uxie up at Lake Acuity, we can do this after either escape roping out of Mount Cornet post Palkia, or taking our loss to Cynthia. The latter I prefer, as we would need to pick back up our flyer, at which point swapping Palkia for Infernape removes the pressure ability triggers from any remaining encounters. Following this, Mesprit at Lake Verity is an optimal final Dex entry if possible. Not simply because it's funny to have Rowan tell us about Mesprit running off and then meet in the lab right after for the upgrade, but rather the fly menuing between Lake Verity and Sandgem is likely faster than any other final Dex entry we could have. And Azelf at Lake Valor is a given, as we already will be heading past here on our way to Sunyshore, giving the perfect chance to swing by. Also, we still need to stop in Celestic for Cynthia's grandma to show us Dialga, and similar to the Mesprit logic, flying back to Celestic is best done right before flying to the northernmost city, Snow Point, for that Uxie visit. Now there are a few more unique but evident cases to cover before the rest. Kicking off with Riolu, whose only method for obtaining is on the non-mandatory Iron Island after teaming up with Riley and taking down 2 double battles that have 11 Pokemon in total in order to receive a Riolu egg. And across those 11 Pokemon, only one would be a new Dex entry, Haunter, who we will cover after finishing up Riolu's options, as there is only one trainer in the game that features it, located a bit out of the way in the basement of Orebird Gate across the water. But we could add this trip in before climbing Mount Cornet, quickly heading down to defeat the trainer, who also has a free Graveler we need, before escaping out and getting back on the path, taking about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Now for obtaining a Haunter, a Ghastly evolution is out of the question, as the highest level we can catch catch it is 7 levels away from evolution before even mentioning the animation time. Further, any Haunter encounters are locked in the post-game, leaving just the infamous Mindy trade in Snowpoint, which ironically saves time since it won't evolve due to the Everstone, but would not at all beat out the available trainers, as there are 6 in total before the post-game, including the previously mentioned Iron Island double. Now, one of these trainers has only a Haunter, found in Hearthome Gym, and although the next best option is right along our path on Route 214 with only an extra Kadabra, the gym encounter is close enough and still a one-shot to Flame Wheel that it wins by 10 seconds. So even when timing from the point of teaming up with Riley to the egg, battling the gym and gate trainers saves over 3 minutes, while providing an additional Graveler, meaning we can stay out of Iron Island. Or at least avoid the Riley section, because a Pokemon in the remaining trio of vanilla cases may require visiting the island, and that would be Cherrim, one of 3 evolutions that can only be seen in battle or by evolution. But catching their pre-evolutions is not an option, as we will discuss in the next section, and even then would require no less than 5 levels. So back to Cherrim, there is one other trainer, but they are over on the unexplored Route 221, with 2 additional Pokemon, neither of which we need. And compared to a post-gym boat ride, trip down 1 floor, and single extra Staravia, this Iron Island route actually ends up being faster by around 20 seconds, giving us our entry. Luckily, Burmese evolutions are even easier, as both Wormadam and Mothim have only a single trainer each, the prior being right along our path on Route 214 as Beauty Devon's sole Pokemon, and the latter on Route 210 also along our path with Ace Trainer Ernest accompanied by 2 unneeded Pokemon. But for both battles, we will have the additional PP needed when following the speedrun, wrapping up our more simple entries. Now from here, the rest of the Pokemon can be encountered either in the wild or from at least 1 trainer. And since a Pokemon's location is not necessarily correlated to that of its corresponding trainers, many of these will require extra comparisons. So to start, we can break the encounters into 4 categories: standard terrain, fishing, honey trees, and overworld. Luckily, one of these, the honey tree encounters alluded to earlier, aren't up for consideration, since it takes 6 real-life hours to have a chance at a Pokemon, and even then the encounter rates are not favorable. No worries though, as Combee and Burmy each have only 1 trainer in the entire game, both right along our path, those being Aroma Lady Hannah on Route 208 and Bugcatcher Donald in Eterna Forest, whose 1 extra Mon is Cricktoon, which fills in another missing entry. Plus, these battles still don't require any additional considerations since we will have the necessary PP to one-shot in both and a routed heal in Hearthome as well as Cheryl's auto heal in Eterna, leaving us with the most complicated of this honey trio, Aipom, who has 4 trainers to compare. The easiest to rule out is right in the middle of the long Route 212, a Pokemon Ranger who has the Monkey and an unnecessary Marill. Similarly, at the start of Route 210, Rancher Marco can also be battled, but has 2 useless encounters. And while Marco is right along our path, the remaining 2 options have additional dex entries up for grabs, or at least can in the case of Wayward Cave's youngster Wayne, who has Aipom and again 2 time wasters, but can be made a double battle with Cassidy, who has a single Baniri which we are looking for. Whereas the final Aipom option is a double battle in Valor Lakefront's 7 Stars restaurant, which includes only 1 other unneeded Mon in Marill and provides us our missing Wooper. With the restaurant being right along our path at multiple points, we can easily rule out Rancher Marco, but we need to see if that Baniri is worth the trek into Wayward Cave, compared to the Wooper we could get at 7 Stars. Interestingly, we do visit all possible locations to capture either, those being Eterna Forest for Baniri and the Great Marsh or Route 212 South for Wooper. Baniri sits at the lowest base encounter rate at 19%, but thanks to Cheryl being with us for the double battles, the odds go up to 34%. And that is already higher than any Wooper encounters in the grass, which cap at 30%, with surfing being the only way to increase this, but at the heavy cost of an extra trip back after getting the HM. And this means that a free Wooper with our Aipom is slightly better than Baniri. But we also need to consider if there are any other trainers for either bonus Mon that offers additional dex entries, and luckily, Baniri can otherwise only be found as the sole Mon of a trainer out front of the Pokemon Mansion, while Wooper is in 1 other double battle at the Jugalife TV station on Thursdays, alongside the 3rd useless Marill mentioned. Thus, with the Wayward Cave and 7-star Apom trainers both being the better choices for their bonus mon, and either one having a reasonable route to sea in the wild or through said alternative trainer, the 7-star battle is the better choice since it is quicker to get to. However, this restaurant doesn't always have the same customers, as only 5 of the 9 pairs are randomly selected to appear each day. But this does give us a 55% shot, and if not, we can reset our game and change the date, giving us an 80% chance by the second attempt. Since it only takes 44 seconds to save and make the time change, as shown in the current All Trainers world record, the 7-star restaurant is a worthwhile risk, as it takes just as long to reach the Wayward Cave trainers anyways. On top of all that, we can even save the battle until after we have Palkia, who will have excess Dragon Claws to easily sweep the battle. But while we still have the game's date in our minds, let's cover the single overworld encounter that relies on it, Drifloon. As you might recall from the Ghost video, this missing entry can be spotted on the overworld outside of the Valley Windworks on Fridays, after kicking out Team Galactic, but not on a Friday that you beat the team. Thus, a date change would always be required to see a wild Drifloon. But there are of course trainers, 2 to be precise, and fittingly both in Hearthome Gym. The first has a Drifloon and a Mischievous, while the second has 2 Drifloon, making the prior better as we need to use Flame Wheels to save Fire Blast while still one-shotting, and this triggers Drifloon's Aftermath, which takes HP and time. In the end, the optimal battle is just slightly faster than the Windworks encounter, and although we know a date change may be necessary for the 7 stars restaurant, doing it before we get to check the customers provides no benefit anyways, so we can stick with the extra EXP and move on to the second to last encounter type, fishing. In total, we have 5 Pokemon that can be fished up: Magikarp, Goldeen, Barboach, Finneon, and Lumineon. That final one requires the Super Rod specifically though, which is locked in the post-game, meaning we need either the single Lumineon trainer, a swimmer right along our path on Route 223, or to evolve the Finneon. But since its max level in the wild with a good rod is 25 and it evolves at 31, this is always slower than the battle, leaving us with 4 actual fishing options to discuss. Now oppositely, Magikarp can be fished up at any fishing location in Sinnoh, and although it only needs an old rod, the other 3 need a good rod. And while each can be found in a variety of locations, the trio do not have any overlapping fishing spots. Fortunately, in many of these spots, the only other spawn alongside the unique target is Magikarp, and at a 45-55% split respectively. On top of that, the good rod is only a few steps off our path on Route 209, and we will actually surf on at least one location that has each Pokemon at this rate across the run. Those being any of the lakes when visiting the Lake Trio for Goldeen, our surf across Route 218 to reach Canalave for Finneon, and perfectly, the Orberg Gates Underground Lake for Barboach, which we visit for that Riolu trainer. Thus, fishing requires no added travel for the entries. However, we still need to consider trainers, especially since there are 21 in total that have at least one of the 4. Of these, Finneon and Barboach can only be found in combination with one of the other 2 fish, that being Goldeen for Barboach and Magikarp for Finneon, meaning we would need at least 2 battles. There are also multiple trainers with these combinations, but there is a clear winner in both cases. For Barboach and Goldeen, the fish on Route 212's bridge with no extra Pokemon is too far a detour, compared to Pastoria Gyms, who is as close to our path as possible, leaving their additional Gyarados not a problem. And for Finneon and Magikarp, Route 221's far-off Fisher Quarry can't match the pair of fishers right along our path through Route 222, with the second being optimal since it only adds a Feebas rather than the first Remoraid and Gyarados. So we can now compare the time it takes to complete the 2 battles, about 2 minutes and 38 seconds, against the time to fish up the 4 in their respective locations, about 1 minute and 54 seconds, suggesting the latter to be optimal. However, that fishing time shows if we were to get each encounter on our first attempt. For example, if we got Magikarp as our first encounter, we would then need to hit 3 45% rolls back to back, which only has a 9% chance. This is before even considering that fishing itself isn't always successful, having a 50% chance with the good rod, giving us only a 6.25% chance to hit 4 encounters in a row. Thus, it will almost always be faster to stick with battling the trainers instead of fishing. Now on to the last encounter category, standard terrain. And to start, let's finalize the binary entry, because we could still go for either the Eterna encounter or solo trainer on Route 212. While we have a 34% chance per encounter in Eterna, that 212 trainer actually has another benefit we haven't discussed, because on our trip over, we can find one of 2 Chatot trainers in the game, the other being in Jubilife TV on Mondays, but both with the parrot as their only mon and being preferable over the best wild encounter in Route 222's grass at just 20%. So after returning to Hardhome for the gym, if we head to 212 for the trainers, we can get both entries and return to the route in 1 minute and 50 seconds, a bit better than the expected 8 total encounters, about 2 minutes and 8 seconds to see both. And while we are outside the Pokemon Mansion, the Trophy Garden actually features a majority of the encounters left to find. But while Pichu and Pikachu can always be seen, Bonsai, Mime Jr., Happiny, and Cleffa are only available as potential additions after obtaining the National Dex. Even more, Pikachu and Pichu only have a 10 and at best 30% rate, respectively. And while half of these Pokemon can be encountered in other locations, the other half cannot, thus requiring trainers. Although technically Happiny can be hatched from the free egg, but if we take a look at the only 2 Happiny trainers, both include some of these other mons, and are found on Route 210, with Breeder Khalil having Pichu, Pikachu, and Happiny, while Breeder Amber has Cleffa, Happiny, and of course an unnecessary Clefairy. Between the two, Khalil is more useful and removes any Trophy Garden requirements, leaving us to deal with the other 3, and perfectly, again on Route 210 as well as 209, we could find the other location of both Bonsai and Mime Jr., each at a 25% rate in the mornings. However, outside of the garden, these are technically version exclusives, meaning a trainer would be required for at least Bonsai. And we have the perfect one, as right after the Combee trainer on 208, the nearby artist has not only Bonsai, but also Mime Jr., providing the complementary mon for free. Thus, Cleffa is the final trophy-adjacent target to handle, with an alternate encounter location specifically in Mount Cornet's first floor at 25% in the mornings. And while we pass through these specific rooms at 3 points in the run, the time spent there is brief, and caves already have a low encounter rate. Now on the trainer side, while we know about Amber on 210 with Happiny, there is another breeder on 209 that has Cleffa, Mime Jr., and an unneeded Budew. So choosing either of these over the encounter is not as quick, since we already have a better route for those entries. However, there is one more Cleffa trainer that's not only right along our path in the Lost Tower, but has no other Pokemon to waste time on, taking just 37 seconds, about the length of 2 random encounters, which is only a 44% success rate, making this trainer the best bet, leaving us with just 2 stragglers. First, Kricketot, who has a variety of encounter spots, but always at a low 10% rate. Luckily, there is a youngster on Route 203 with a Soul Kricketot that is an option for the speedrun already, as we need to take on a few trainers before the first gym to evolve Chimchar. So finally, we have Tentacool, who appears in 12 bodies of water, always at a favorable 60% rate. Unsurprisingly, we do surf on one of these during the run, Route 218, on our way to Conolave. And this is far better than either of the 2 trainers, with one on the unexplored Route 220 including 2 extra mons, and the other on our final route, but oddly out of the way in this corner along with an unneeded duck, meaning we can simply leave our rappel down until after we find a Tentacool on 218, which ends up being the only truly random encounter of the 32 dex entries we need. But somehow, there is still one critical detail we have yet to resolve. One that impacts not only the speed at which Palkia can carry us through the endgame, but also whether some of our planned entries are optimal or even possible, and that is the time of day. In terms of Palkia, we need to pick up the Choice Specs, a held item which boosts special attack by 50% while locking the holder into one move, but this item can only be obtained from a Celestic Shop NPC in the morning. More important to our goal though, the 7 Stars Restaurant, our best route to get Aipom and a free Wooper, opens at 9 AM, leaving only an hour until the glasses disappear. Of course, there is a solution. We simply play early enough to get the specs, but late enough that it is past 9 when heading towards 7 stars with Palkia. For this, 6 AM will suffice, as it only takes the world record 2 hours and 18 minutes to get the glasses, and no less than 3 hours to have Palkia. And since our pre-Palkia dex entries will not add anywhere near the 1 hour and 42 minutes that would take us past morning, we are all set, and the National Dex route is finalized. So after following the Manipulas speedrun up to Cynthia's Milotic while grabbing 29 of the entries along the way, we simply head for a Dialga pick, make 2 legendary escapes, and then return to the lab where the one and only Professor Oak provides us the National Dex upgrade, completing our challenge. But remember, this is just one game, and with our catching series on the channel always covering all the mainline games, I can't help but wonder even more how tricky it might be to try this kind of dex-based challenge in other regions. But as always, I would love to know what you thought about this challenge, and if you would like to see more. And for anyone who watched the Ditto video a whole year ago and made it this far, extra thanks for the additional support, and I hope you still enjoyed the video. Lately, it's felt like it might be time to expand the scope of the channel a bit, and this was one direction that I could test more easily while working to finish the now close to 50% complete edit on Roses. It's currently a race to see if Roses will be done before I prepare my first video featuring Legends, which is planned to release very soon after the game. But until then, thanks so much for watching, and more to come soon.